Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. We're back for our monthly chat. Diane World Returns, CEO and founder at Rendell Intelligence, and we are now in April 2025, which covers Easter. Hi, Di.
Hi, Simon. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. All good. So we're in what should be one of the key trading periods of the year now, shouldn't it? Outside of Christmas.
Absolutely. This year was a bit strange because obviously last year in 2024, Easter was at the tail end of March. And this year it's in middle of April. So that offset has caused some distortion. But to get over that, quite a lot of the data houses have put an average out for March and April, which sort of gives that, balances that out a little. And I wish I could say it was fabulous news.
That's not good.
Well, it's not fantastic. And it's a bit of a holding pattern, really. I think the data on consumer confidence, which I think is probably maybe where I'll start with actually, is saying that consumers are nervous. The latest GfK data, so they produce consumer confidence index each month, and they produce it fairly early in the month, so about the same time as just after Easter, showed that their consumer confidence dropped by 4 points on their index score, so from minus 19 in March to minus 23 in April. Consumers are definitely feeling more nervous, and that was reinforced by the recent PwC consumer sentiment report. And they showed that consumers of all ages were feeling less positive, apart from the 25 to 34-year-olds, which is probably fueled by increased wage increases. Consumers are generally quite nervous, and that impacted what occurred in April and spending in April.
And that 25 age band, I suppose that's people who are again coming out of uni almost, isn't it? And then in their first jobs and starting at a junior level, and then maybe getting bigger pay increases, etc.
Absolutely. And of course, the wage market, the employment market is quite tight. People are looking for good people. And we've seen some good pay rises over the last couple of years. And I think that's flowing through into that 25 to 34-year-old age group. And of course, they haven't probably yet tied themselves down to mortgages as much, and many of them haven't got families. So they aren't incurring those fixed costs that a lot of older people are. So they're sitting there looking at paid wage increases and feeling quite positive, really. But whilst the rest of us who are slightly older are labouring under increased costs.
Indeed. I mean, we've talked about this now for quite a while, haven't we, in terms of kind of this turbulent air and treacherous water. So it feels, again, still unstable. What were some of the other details that you've seen in this time period?
Yeah, so Footfall, which was produced by Sensormatics, that's footfall into retail stores, which is a good proxy for how many customers stores are attracting, went up significantly in April by 7.2% from April last year. But of course, don't forget, Easter wasn't in April last year, so we're looking at a low comparable. Over the 2 months, March and April, so that takes out the distortion of the offset of Easter, footfall was up by 0.2% from last year. So not a massive increase at all. And most of that was from retail parks. So 2.7% increase in retail parks. So people were definitely going out of town to shop. Shopping centres, actually, footfall dropped over the 2 months by 0.7. So, the fashion element, the discretionary element was, footfall dropped. And interestingly, BRC also did this 2-month average as well. And they came out with an average of 4.3% increase over the 2 months. But of course, that includes store sales and non-food and non-store sales, in town and out of town. The whole gamut. Sales did go up in April by 7%, so similar to the Sensormatic data, but they'd only gone up in March by 1.1%, which of course was non-Easter versus Easter last year. So 4.3% up over the 2 months, which is good. But of course, that, as I said, that includes food, non-food, and non-store sales. In terms of sales in the high street, measured by Beauclair, still wasn't fabulous. It was April wasn't fabulous. It was flat on last year, 0.1% below April last year. So given that we had Easter this year in April and we didn't have it last year, that's not particularly strong. And over the 2 months, March and April, high street sales dropped by 2.2%. So, people, high streets are having a fairly challenging time. So not great. I mean, Sensormatic said over the 2 months, footfall in high streets was just 0.2% up. So it's not surprising that sales aren't rocketing through the roof in the high streets. Footfall's not having, an amazing change either. So, I think people are just waiting to see what's happening, quite cautious. It was good news in the previous few weeks with the reduction in interest rates. But then inflation came through during this week, which has gone up to 3.5%, reflecting increases in sort of housing and utility prices, which is the main driver of that. And interestingly, also what the ONS call communication, which is essentially telephony prices, that's gone up significantly as well. So that's going to pinch a lot of people. But on the plus side for retail destinations, clothing and footwear is actually in a period of deflation. So in April, prices dropped by 0.4%, possibly through discounting, as people aren't really buying a lot of fashion.
I suppose weather dependency, isn't it? And then we're in that season now where it's kind of swimwear and holiday stuff, isn't it? So if you've not booked a holiday abroad, that'll slow down sales. If the weather's not good, that'll slow down sales, although we'll see where it pans out in May because we've had a period of nice weather. So that, fashion's always stuck in that cycle, isn't it, of weather dependency and to some degree how much we're spending going abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. But, last April fashion did go up, inflation went up, which of course that fed the reduction in fashion sales. And now, of course, retailers are forced to discount a little bit. And people, I think fashion's just had a really challenging time. It continues to be challenging. The Beauclair data has shown that over the first 4 months of the year, fashion sales have dropped by just over 5%, which is better than last year where they dropped over 6%, but it's still, pulling overall sales in our high streets down by a long way. In fact, other people, people have also pulled back on other spending, food and drink, general retail, which is department stores, health and beauty. All of those have seen bigger reductions over these 4 months than the 4 months last year. So people are generally quite cautious because we're just uncertain about what the future's going to hold for us.
So kind of same summary as some previous episodes. People are cautious. We're spending less. Big tickets, tricky if that's what you're trying to sell. I suppose the one thing that we've probably not seen come through yet, and it'd be interesting how and if it does, is end of April was the first time employers had to pay the new national living wage and the NI increased contributions. So maybe May might be too soon. June, July, August, we might see some impact of that, where if this sales and footfall trend continues, that's really double whammy because costs have gone up and my sales have plateaued or gone down.
Absolutely. But the positive thing will be that people will probably have feeling a little bit more confidence about the impact of that on themselves, because I think that's created a few shockwaves amongst employees. Will their employer, contract the workforce? Will they lose their jobs because they can't afford to pay the increased NI? So if we can get beyond that, I think people might feel a little bit more confident. Although PwC do say that, a lowering of consumer sentiment actually precurses a change in behaviour sort of 6 months ahead. So they're saying they've typically seen that when consumer sentiment declines, we see that change in behaviour in 6 months. So they seem to say that it was a precursor to even worse trading, which doesn't sound particularly encouraging, particularly as then we'll be virtually at Christmas.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll deal with that when we get the figures.
Yes.
Hopefully there's some sunshine, bright news in the sky. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the unemployment figures are tracking as well as we get into kind of 3 months post national living wage. I have a sneaky feeling that may start to rise because people have to make difficult decisions based on trading.
Yes, absolutely. The things like the cyber attacks in retail have created uncertainty as well. That's sort of, making the ground a little bit rocky for retailers as well. I mean, the cost for M&S, for example, is 300 million, I think, as we speak today.
Yeah, there's different figures being bandied around, but I mean, clearly it's been huge from I suppose, an emotional point of view for the colleagues and all the people trying to fix it, and then from a hard cash point of view from losing sales, and then from a customer point of view of there'll be sympathy up to a point, but then people will have to shop elsewhere if they can't get the goods.
Yeah, and also, of course, M&S and other retailers will be now looking at their own systems quite critically and thinking, do we need to increase our expenditure on cybersecurity, which, of course, has to be taken from somewhere else on their balance sheet. So it's, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, but they need to make sure they can trade. And, this is a worst case scenario for M&S, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's a shot across the bows for other companies, isn't it? If they've
absolutely
kicked it down the road, if they've not, it's not important. I'm sure it's important in most organisations, but yeah, I suspect there's been some interesting senior executive conversations in lots of boardrooms from the IT department pushing for those things to get fast-tracked, reviewed, increase in budget, as you say, but there's not a bottomless pit. So,
no.
Yeah, interesting if there's any more or how that pans out, or if this was just really a wake-up call. They've got critical press and the people that have done it, and M&S have got some relatively good press and some of the co-op side of it. But yeah, it's whether this is a sustained thing or it's really just a wake-up call and a PR stunt to show no one's safe.
Absolutely.
We'll pause there. I always say this at the end of these. Hopefully we'll be back next month with some good news. We'll see. It will have been sunny in May. We know that at the time of recording. That maybe helps us feel a little bit better and buy some slightly different things. But yeah, I think the sentiment is lots of uncertainty. People aren't sure, and therefore they don't spend.
No. I mean, it's it's a no penalty thing to do is hold back on your spending. You don't have to incur any penalty if you just don't spend any money.
Absolutely. Great to speak as always, and we'll catch up next month.
Great. Look forward to it.